Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Jack Parsons got me on the moon.
Good evening again, and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. I hope you enjoyed the previous show with myself and Sarah talking about Crowley and the Golem, and this is another hour or so of more of the same, but continued as a VoN on my Beyond Room 313 channel. I've had some breaks in work lately, and I've been using my recorder to do this, so I have a very good digital recorder, and I use it as a remote VoN recording machine, so it's working out quite well. It's not requiring too much editing or anything. And if you hear raindrops in the background, yeah, that's because it's raining. I'm hitting it in the window, so hopefully it won't cause too much disruption and maybe even create a bit of atmosphere. Now, I want to talk about charisma and how you can generate your own charisma as opposed to not having any charisma. Any kind of magic working to be successful at it, rather than waffling about theory like most of the so-called occultists today do, is to actually have a good charismatic charge. Charisma is the initial thing that says this person has a magical ability. We use the term in show business that they have it. But that's charisma. Now, it doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, what you look like, what sex you are, what race, religion, social class. You can expand your charisma. It's like a muscle. And essentially what your charisma is a transmission by your nervous system that extends out beyond you to the point where people feel your genuine essence when they're in your proximity or when they see you talking or being with people or, talking on the stage or on the radio or so on. Now, if you look at one of the things Crowley said about modern magic was, up until the arrival of him, and it's completely true, that there was no humour in the magical Western tradition. That's absolutely true. And it still continues on. You see so many of these, so people call themselves like famous occultists. Not all of them. There's quite a few of them. They're oh so serious. They're oh so theoretical. They're oh so philosophical. They're oh so verbose. But what do they actually produce in terms of actual operations and magical workings? I don't see anything. And they also seem to lack humour and personality. Like, they're not the kind of person you want to hang out with, except if you're the type who likes to be condescended to and spoken down to. Otherwise, they completely lack charisma, many of them. They don't have any at all. Now, charisma is absolutely likability. And a huge part of being liked, or people finding you likable, is honesty and your ability to not take yourself too seriously. That's the most important thing of all. not take yourself too seriously. Because once you do that, you're automatically in a situation where you haven't not putting up a front or a barrier to people to actually present a fake version of yourself to the world. You are what it says on the tin, and people have an instinctual, innate feeling to recognize this and to go along with it. And this is the beginning of your charismatic charge. You don't get it by ordering people around or setting out protocols and being the most effective at these protocols. That's how cult leaders work. You find that nearly every cult leader has no charm or personality. They're actually in negative charisma, but they control their followers by protocols and rules and regulations. This is to compensate for the fact that they don't have charismatic power. So again, it's the nervous system. Ultimately, it's that. And step one to that is not taking yourself too seriously. Another part of it is detaching yourself from individuals and systems which annoy you, affect you, get on your nerves. For instance, you cannot be an occultist if you're obsessed with destroying somebody else. Okay, it's just not possible, because you're robbing yourself. You're handing over all your life energy to this person, and that's why people say to me, "Can we take down this politician?" Absolutely not. Don't come to me for that. I need that energy for me and my spiritual work and self-development, and that's a big part of it. Now, that's the long game for producing magical manifestation and attaining things. Work on your charisma, work on yourself, and be yourself. Be honest, and make yourself likable. If you are likable, if you're not likable, people will see through it. Now, that's one way of doing it. Another way is black magic. Black magic generally gets instant results, but it has long-term catastrophic aftermath. Now, this is why one of the magical workings I'm involved in at the moment is the destruction of the Irish economy, because it will hasten the end of these profane monsters who've taken over my country and decided to make second-class citizens of the Irish. In lots of ways. The Irish only tolerate it because the economy here is good and times are good. If we destroy the economy, they will get their honour back and stand up to these profane curs who are using black magic against us. That's what the recent hate speech law is all about. It's black magic. That's what the lockdowns were about, black magic. That's what the social distancing, the face masks, they were all black magic. But what about ceremonial black magic? Absolutely, that exists. There's one particular group, I'm not going to name them. Well, you know, I had trouble about 5 or 6 years ago at one group down in West Cork. That was led by a guy who's dead now. But there's one particularly nasty group operating on the Welsh borders between England and Wales. And they're unashamedly, involved in the dark arts. With quite some success too, I might add. Now, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, and when I was first getting into this stuff, quite young, like I said, the occult revival thing that had started with the hippies in the 60s was starting to taper off. It was starting to lose its own charisma. And it was a wonderful, glorious time. And there were so many books and so many authors and so many, popular newsstand things of real magical insight and all kinds of occult and paranormal and Fortean, and very little conspiracy theory. But conspiracy theory is actually a form of magical ritual. I'll explain that someday in a later video, but actually to indulge conspiracy is a form of magic. And depending how you do it, it's a form of black magic or a form of white magic. But there was a character back then who all the magazines all the, even newspapers. He occasionally appeared on radio or TV. He was completely vanished, and I can't find out whatever happened to him. And his name was Serge Kordiev. Now, Serge Kordiev was a photojournalist investigator who looked into the world of black magic, and he actually came to be part of a black magic ritual. He and his wife suddenly started to become very wealthy after partaking in these black magic rituals. Now, they're brought through a system of initiations, and the early stuff seemed pretty benign and harmless. I hope that rain isn't too much of a problem. And later stuff actually frightened them out of the group. One of these rituals included a local businessman that they had a magical assassination of, this group that they were with. And you can hear the wind now. Wow. And this involved making a life-size dummy of the businessman and killing it. And inside it was the sparrow's blood, which had been the sparrow had been killed, and then the blood put into this magical dummy, which was brutally attacked with knives. And then the naked women drank the blood of the sparrow from the body of this symbolic voodoo, sympathetic magic mannequin. Kordiev and his wife were shocked to find out a week or two later that the famous business person had suddenly dropped dead. And then they began to make their way out of it. Well, anyway, how this all happened for Kordiev was that he was making public mention of it around here and there, that saying he was very interested in joining a dark occult group. And one day, out of the blue, he received a phone call, and there was a man on the other end, and he asked him if he was interested in learning more about black magic. And the guy said, "If you do join us, there's no backing out. I hope you understand that." Now, the Kordievs thought that they were going to get involved in something that was basically cosplay, and to their surprise, they were picked up in a chauffeur-driven Humber saloon, a fancy English car from the 1960s, and taken to a very large Victorian stately home. They were ushered by a servant around the back of the house, and out there was a fairly big outbuilding. Inside it there was a room, and they found there was wash basins, lockers, coat hangers, just like a sports changing room, a fitting room, with both male and female clothing and underclothing as well as overcoats. So it was just like a sports changing room, locker room. Now, Kordiev said, "After my previous experiences, suspected that money would be required. Donations to the magical group. Although he was taken back when he was asked for £86 and 6 shillings. That was a lot of money back then. The initial subscription was £25 plus £3 initiation fee, and £15, 10 shillings for the ceremonial clothes for him and his wife. They were told that if they failed to accept the invitation, they would get back their 3 guinea, which is the £3, 3 shillings initiation fee. That's what a guinea is, a pound, and it was a pound and a shilling. The shilling was usually a taxation on things. The Kordievs were served drinks from a small bar, and by the time they were asked to strip their clothes off a bit later, they were both quite drunk. They were given small black satin aprons and these red cloths like a fabric belt to wear around their waists. Each of the black aprons had a orange lining and was decorated in the front with an orange eye inside a triangle. The guide for the initiation removed their clothes, and having put on this black satin robe decorated with the same orange symbol of the all-seeing eye inside the triangle, and then led them through a green door and into a large room. There was a predominant colour scheme of the room, and it was red, black and white. The floor was tiled in black with a white pentagram superimposed upon this. Around the three walls, I guess for sound dampening effects, was heavy carpets hung from the ceilings. And there was another wall that was covered in a huge mural showing a horned creature overpowering a naked girl among lurid flames. Now beneath this mural stood the altar, which had 6 candles. And before the altar, at a slightly lower level, was this marble slab. There was a brazier that was on fire combined with the candles that provided the only lighting in the room. So just think about that. The room was pitch black except for a brazier and candles. These heavy sound dampening rugs on the walls, and then this giant mural being illuminated by the flickering flames. This is the theatrics of this kind of magic. Very Victorian. Not surprised. This is what I've heard rumours that the floor of the building in Classy Bond, where Mountbatten was up the road, actually has a gigantic pentagram underneath the carpeting. I have not been confirmed. That is just something that someone told me who claimed to have worked up there. Now Kordiev and his wife were in a half circle with about a dozen people and robed figures, very similar to how they were portrayed in the Stanley Kubrick film Eyes Wide Shut. This deep voice boomed from the darkness and ordered the newcomers to face the circle of hooded figures. It then said, "Brothers and sisters, on this occasion 2 strangers pay for admission to our fold, and it is for you, disciples of the Prince of Darkness, to say now whether you have or have not any objection or reason to why these 2 persons should not be received into our circle." The Kordievs stood there, and what blew their mind was the sound of a goat. A bleating goat was heard in the darkness. No human, a bleating goat. So the Kordievs on this event, this initiation event, and later events, knew that there was a lot of showmanship, a lot of theatrics, and so on going on. This is to heighten the charge of the nervous system. He said that the goat sound was clearly tape recorded, but when he first heard it at first, it was startling. He said that when the altar was brilliantly illuminated, the quality of light and the increased heat in the room seemed to indicate that it was produced by an enormous hidden arc of light, like the ones used in filming. They were also blinded by the light to an extent, or, dazzled by it, bedazzled. And the Kordos suddenly realised that there was a muscular-looking man, entirely naked, and apparently oiled with a reddish substance, was standing before the altar. On either side of the altar there was these 2 attractive young girls, clad in black robes. These acolytes ordered the Kordevs to kneel down before the master, and obediently they both did. Now remember that at this point they were just really just interested as a hobby, more, or just see what was happening, rather than being true believers. Kordiev's wife said she never saw the face of the man, and it was only known to the master, as he wore a black devil mask covering most of his face. It was difficult for them to recall the exact words of the ceremony, but the 2 girl assistants asked them if they were married, and when they said that they were married in a registry office rather than a church, they seemed both pleased. Kordiev said that a masked man threw a handful of some substance into the brazier, which gave off a thick perfume smoke, which they believed to be hashish or some other similar drug. Then the Kordievs were asked to swear perpetual homage to Satan. The first time the name had been mentioned, and to sign their oath in blood. Small slashes were made in the lobes of their ears for this purpose, and they were given the names Frater Capricornus and Soror Gemini. They later discovered that all the other members went by names associated with the zodiac. They then welcomed the couple into the circle, and the masked master placed his hand on their genitalia. They both claimed to have felt an odd tingling sensation, which they believed was caused by an induction coil with a low power current. But they could not explain the surge of energy they felt. It was followed by a short ritual dance in which the robed figures discarded their coverings and danced back to back in a sort of what they called an inverted polka. The following morning, the courtiers recounted the event the night before, and they all said it felt like they were at a nightmare. But amazingly, there were dramatic changes in their professional lives after that. That was weird. There's a really big storm kicking up outside now. Hear that wind? I don't know if you can hear the wind. The car is actually shaking back and forth quite violently. For a start, an enormous amount to the core devs was spent on joining the group was immediately covered by checks that came from his agent, and he was inundated with requests for works from magazines and journals, and everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. The courtiers were then asked to several more meetings, usually followed by the same pattern as the first. In one of the meetings, a young girl member was accused of betraying the confidence to an outsider, and she was made to act as a naked altar while a form of black magic was said over her, culminated in her being ravished by the master. During the course of the mass, a wax dummy incorporating nails and hair from the outsider was placed on the altar, a black cock was sacrificed, and members were asked to drink its blood from a chalice. The master stabbed the wax doll with his knife. Either red liquid or blood gushed out from the splattered all over the naked girl on the altar. I thought that the whole thing was rather unpleasant, a piece of histrionics, until I was shown the news clipping paper the next meeting. I was told how the outsider, a man who was fairly well known, had collapsed and died of a mysterious heart attack on the night of the Black Mass. Now, this is the thing with the courtiers. Were they telling the truth about this? Or did this really happen? It all seems so Dennis Wheatley, doesn't it? Devil rides out kind of thing. But we have to remember that these aristocrats really did get up to this. You know, this when people say that Stanley Kubrick was killed for being a whistleblower on Eyes Wide Shut. This has been known about for years. Now, there's a thing, a kind of a dichotomy there, where you say to yourself, are these parlour games with the aristocrats, or are they real rituals? And I think in some aristocrats, they're parlour games. They're the kind of theatrical, magical, ceremonial version of a folly. You know the way the aristocrats build follies on their land. I think it's the ceremonial, magical version of that. But in some of them, I think they're doing the real thing. Now, the death of this businessman and others they heard about, including the woman with the sparrow. Remember at the beginning I talked about the sparrow? Decided that they were both going to leave the group for good. It spooked them out too much because they were discovering that black magic works. That's what was going on there. But the thing was, at the moment they were going to leave, they had found out that a confirmation ceremony for both Kordiev and his wife, what they were due to undertake, consisting of copulation with the master, the high priestess, sounding very much like a Gnostic mass here, on the night of the Black Mass. This finally decided me to leave the group for good. By this time I had learned that the confirmation ceremony which both my wife and I were due to undertake, consists of copulation with the Master High Priestess, the prospect did not appeal. Well, and this finally decided me to leave the group. No, but it soon became apparent that they had taken the oath at the beginning, and these groups don't like you breaking those oaths. They're not to be taken lightly. They made a couple of excuses for not attending the next few meetings, but were eventually no longer invited. The run of luck which they had been enjoying during their black magic period had ceased. Kordiev was obliged to go to the law over a personal matter and was almost bankrupt by massive legal fees. And other further troubles prevented him from working for some time and brought his wife to the verge of a nervous breakdown. You see, black magic, instant results, long-term catastrophe. And the only way you avoid the long-term catastrophe is by the continual involvement with the ritual. So like the ritual becomes almost like your dependency thing. So you become involved in the black magic circle, you do these things, the money starts flying in, it's all great, and then you leave and it falls apart. Like Costa Nostra thing, one in, all in. So at this point the Kordievs were desperate and decided to move to Rodney Marsh, and eventually found suitable premises, and it was there their final troubles began. One particular night, Kordiev and his wife returned home to find an enormous toad sitting on the doorstep. Kordiev, her nerves on edge because of all the calamities which had occurred recently, became hysterical, and Kordiev himself admitted to being rattled by the experience as well. Then a supernatural event occurred that night. Now this is Kordiev's recounting it years later. My studio adjoins the house, and as usual I had locked it securely before retiring. The windows were barred and the frames themselves were bolted from the inside. It seems rather ridiculous now, but the wind was howling in and off the sea. Oh my God, just like it is here right now. That's weird. You get it all here on the Velocity now, don't you? Giving the whole business of atmosphere of a horror film. My wife and I went to bed and seemed to be asleep for only minutes. When we both sat bolt upright, were awake. Outside from the direction of the studio came the sound of a maniacal laughter. Absolutely horrifying. Then came the sound of glass smashing, and my fear of the unknown turned to apprehension about the safety of my photographic equipment worth several hundreds of pounds, which would be hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars today. This is back in the late 60s now. The following morning I went downstairs after a restless night to find my retriever, his dog, cowering in the corner of the kitchen. The studios was a shambles. Drapes and furniture had been torn down and broken everywhere and strewn all over the place. The carpet had been stripped back, and the window was broken so thoroughly that the glazing bars had broken under the weight of someone or something bursting out, for the lawn and path were littered with broken glass. And this time I had no explanation. The facts were simple. The place was empty when I locked it up, and there were obvious signs of a breakout, but no signs of all whatsoever what caused the damage and got in. I still think that somehow the incident was caused by the evil power in revenge for our breaking away from the Satanist group. Well, absolutely it was. I think even then, the easiest thing to have... This could also have been their own terror who did this. This is why, if you're involved in magical insurrection or magical warfare, as I did the other day regarding what we're going to bring Ireland to its knees economically, you will rustle up climatic energies, because the water within the air is the easiest substance to affect with consciousness. And I think that's why we got a little bit of a show there when I was reading about the ceremonial magic in this car. A storm suddenly whipped up. very, very interesting stuff. Now, it's very difficult to find information on the Kordievs, really. It's almost like they were around for a bit, and then that was the end of them. We never heard any more of them. I never fully understood, like, why this guy's story isn't a major element within the history of the occult. It's not, for some reason, and it should be, because he played a huge part in it. And in particular, the concept of the dangerous rituals, you know. The ritual that brings you close to danger in a group ceremonial way. You think of Dennis Wheatley when he published his novel, and it was in 1934, The Devil Rides Out. Now, this was a story, and the subtitle was a black magic story. A lot of his books said that. And it was quickly acclaimed as the best horror novel since Stoker's Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's true. On the flyleaf of the book, Wheatley gave a solemn word up to his voice to his readers. I desire to state, he wrote, that I personally have never assisted at or participated in any ceremony connected with magic, black or white. Should any of my readers incline to do a serious study of the subject and thus come into contact with a man or woman of power, and he spelt that power with a capital P, I feel that it's only right to urge them most strongly to refrain from being drawn into the practice of the secret art. To do so would bring them into dangers of very real and concrete nature. What was Wheatley talking about in all this? Being blackmailed by an occult group after being at a meeting? Maybe, I don't know. Avoiding the English witchcraft laws? Maybe. Or the powers of the supernatural events coming back with unpleasant experiences like what happened to Kordievs. Now, Wheatley's books they've sold on magic stories like The Devil Rides Out, Devil of Dorothy the Irish Witch, The Haunting of Toby Jug. These books have sold, Strange Conflict. These books have sold in their countless millions. He's one of the best-selling English language authors of all time. And you know they've all been made into several successful movies. And yet he feels strongly that evil powers do exist and are capable of weakening both capable of wreaking of both physical and mental havoc. It's almost like he's been so. This is interesting about Wheatley, is that his books, you know, again, this would have been like I was talking about this for years, avoiding the English witchcraft laws, but his books, for a man who spent his years warning others about do not get involved in the magical arts, he wrote in depth about it constantly using actual magical theory. It was almost like at times he was a cross between Crowley and Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General. Wheatley seemed to tread both sides of that world. Here's magical theory, here's the dark arts, here's the men of power. And but don't do it, you lose your soul, it'll be banned, it'll be dangerous. A very interesting paradox within Wheatley's work. Now, I mentioned about Kordiev, the folklore journalist. He was still alive in the 80s, but I have not heard anything of him since. And as Kordiev, and I mentioned him going to that ritual, he was an agnostic. And Kordiev said after his experience, said that I would certainly join Mr. Wheatley in his wholesale condemnation of the darker side of black magic. Kordiev's wife Anne, since the early days of their marriage, had tended towards a belief in reincarnation. She looked into Buddhism and Hinduism. Neither she or her husband had ever been convinced by what they term in the orthodox side of religion. traditional Abrahamic religions. She treated the occult as spiritualism, and he says he dismissed it out of hand. But when they'd read the works of Crowley and Montague Summers, they became interested in an objective sort of way. They wanted to know what sort of people and what kind of people resorted to the powers of darkness, as they called it. What did they do it, and what did they hope to achieve? Well, they found out they got wealth. Kordiev, like I said, decided to conduct the investigation, and it was all done with the hope of selling the findings to a newspaper. And they would be hanging out in kind of clubs in Soho and Chelsea and London, trying to meet these crazy cats. And they were the first one they came to was the first black mass that they were invited to. The fee was 20 guineas, so that was £20 and 20 shillings. And it turned out to be an obscene exhibition for the audience, which would have much better value for their money if they had spent it in a seedy strip club. Now, Kordiev became disillusioned with this belief that there really was actual magical circles involved in magic, until August in 1959, when he believes he encountered the real thing. He had a yacht at the time, which him and his wife Anne had lived on, and he says that they were moored at Burnham on Crouch in Essex, and had just secured everything for the night. Anne went to bed, and I took the dog for a stroll down past the clock tower towards the Royal Corinthian Yacht Club shortly before midnight, and about a half dozen large and expensive cars passed by him. He was a keen yachtsman, so he's not surprised. He was familiar with the irregular movements of the craft and crew, but he was rather curious a moment or so later to find that the cars were not parked at the yacht club. Instead, they were parked along a distant seawall, and the moonlight showed a fairly large group of people moving towards the mouth of the Crouch River. Something about the nature of the group and their stealthy silence, it just captivated Kordiev. He just wanted to know more, but he was unable to investigate them further until the next day, and he found the footprints on the beach and followed them. He says he was fascinated as to why these apparently wealthy people should drive their Rolls Royces and Bentleys to the edge of town and then walk out to the wilderness of the dikes and the scrub grass on the marshes. Suddenly, over a slight rise, he saw the outline of a derelict farm and outbuilding that he had never come across before. The roof beams were showing through broken slates, the paths were overgrown, and the windows had long since lost their glass. But the crushed grass leading up to the house indicated that the desolate place had been a destination of the people he had seen the previous night. Now, Kordiev at this point really believed he was getting close to the action, so to speak, to a sort of occult setup which he'd been interested in finding for all this time, and his suspicions were dramatically confirmed when he entered the main room of an old farmhouse. The floor had been swept clean, and the centre was a double circle with a small triangle. Within the double ring of the circle were the remnants of 5 burnt-out black candles, which he was later to discover were made from pitch and wax. Fragments of incense, bloody feathers, the remains of a fire in a grate, and perhaps most sinister of all, the scorched remnants of a Bible lay in various parts of the room. Kordiev said, "I was very excited," he recalled, "and I lost no time in taking pictures of the scene. I felt that something must have disturbed the group for them to have left signs and their presence in this way, and I didn't want to be found in a place where should any of them return." Now, Kordiev had sent the film of the photographs to the Sunday Pictorial, and the newspaper conducted an investigation, ran a feature of the strange discovery. The result was that Kordiev received several letters, some anonymous and some threatening, others from white witches, though through the letter he found himself contacting the group that I had mentioned, where him and his wife went to and became indoctrinated into. So Kordiev, this is of, you hear the story all the time. People who think that the whole magic occult thing is a joke, then they get on the wrong side of somebody who's involved in it, and they get their ass whooped. And you say to yourself, oh, this is such a cliche, isn't it? No, but it's true. It does happen. It does happen. Now, why are these aristocrats into the black arts? Is this how they became aristocrats? Possibly. Is this how they gained their wealth? Possibly. Are they bored? I think in some cases that's definitely the truth. They're bored and they're out to do something. But on another level, I really do believe that many of them who are involved in this have a very sincere belief in the powers they're working with. The wind still howling. I'm mad here. Although it's adding to an atmospheric quality. I hope it's not too loud where it's drowning out my voice. I don't think it will. We'll find out when we get back. One of the aspects of magic that isn't really talked about much is that the successful magi or magical operative will have the ability of prophecy. Now, not prophecy like a seer, or a prophecy in the sense of foretelling an event precisely, but because of the magical mind, its relationship and understanding of symbolism, its nature to see reality in symbolic terms, means that they have a lexicon that is not locked into the space-time reality. By that I mean that they will often say things that come to pass, and they know there's something going on. So for instance, they may have this notion of something going on in a relationship, and they don't know that the relationship may be going downhill, or the person they're with is seeing someone else, or something like that, or it's about to end. But they will often talk about things and words and statements pertaining to the end of the relationship come out during the terms of normal discussion or discourse, and it's a fascinating thing. And it's not just that, it can relate to lots of things. Neil Oliver yesterday, I want to get his book on ghosts, but he told the story of the black car of Skye. And prior to an awful car accident that happened in Skye, when a black car carrying a family or a group of people, including a woman and 2 children, crashed into the sea, and the woman and the children drowned. Leading up to this event, there was a kind of a foretelling. This black car was racing around the island at speed. No one knew who was driving it. No one knew who was behind the wheel. It was a classic phantom car story. And it was this car that showed up as a kind of a premonition, a prophecy of what was to happen. Now, Skye at this time, the Isle of Skye would have been, this is back in the 20s, I believe, it was quite remote. There wouldn't have been many cars, so a black car driving at speed down narrow gauge roads, single lane roads, would have been very, visible to everybody. And yet, it would have been highly unlikely that nobody knew who was driving the car. The car was almost like a telepathic egregore of the tragedy that was about to unfold. And simply because people in Skye back then were a bit less affected by electromagnetic smog and so on, that the car appeared in this egregorical form of a tragedy which would befall the island. There was actually a scandal as well regarding a priest who saved himself and let the 2 children drown. You will find that you have a predictive element to your nature, because the expansion of your nervous system flies out in all directions. Not just in immediate space-time, but in future and past space-time. And you get hints of the future. We see that all the time, don't we, with The Simpsons? The concentration of the artistic process creates a kind of a passive premonition, searing, that shows the future to come in an artistic way. Remember how we said about the magical, the results are often poetic. So like me, in the lead up to the 2020, I'd made one video on the possibility of a coronal mass ejection from the sun, specifically using the word coronal, corona. And soon after, I made another video on the Committee of Public Safety in France, and how they had used the concept of public safety in order to imprison and do wicked deeds, the French government. And this will happen again. And I think, whoa, I'm getting freaked out here. There's leaves bashing up. You hear that? There's leaves bashing up against the car. And I'm not parked under any trees, so I think I'm safe. The Committee on Public Safety, and that led to 2020. So I'd seen it was called coronavirus, coronal mass injection, oh my god, coronal mass ejection, coronal mass injection. I just only thought about that one just now. The Needlecraft coronal mass injection. I only just thought about that one just now. You see, my as this storm is like amplifying my own nervous system. I wasn't joking when I said it comes out in poetry, in a poetic form. I just thought about that just now because I saw a Photoshop thing of what Marie Antoinette's famous painting of her, what she would look like without makeup, and she was the last queen of France before Robespierre and the reign of terror under the Committee on Public Safety and all that. I'll just keep an eye out on these trees here. There's the one next to me has got a huge heavy trunk, so I think that's okay. And the others are all, the ones that could fall over are all the way, down the way. So they have this element of prophecy that appears. And as our nervous systems have deteriorated, but the average person's nervous system has deteriorated since since mass communications. The electromagnetic smog has played a huge part in this. People have lost their intuition and their insight as a result of mass communications, electrosmog. And how that is with the digital stuff, I don't know. The digital noise, digital smog, because the human body is analog, so it might not directly affect it in terms of cognition, although it could be affected in other ways in terms of physical health. But it's not affected in terms of cognition. And I was recently talking about a friend about this the other night, and she has this theory that she has a book coming out, but I won't talk too much about it, but similar to this subject we were talking about, the electrosmog thing. And it's a very good theory she's put forward. I'm writing the foreword for the book. And when it comes out, I'll have her on Hocus Focus or some other show to talk about it. But it's a sound theory, I have to say, the more I think about it. But so the digital stuff might not directly affect us until they get a microchip inside us. They'll never get a microchip inside me. Just like they never got their coronal mass injection. Oh God, I can't believe I didn't think about that one till now. It's staring me in the face all the time. The coronal mass injection. Coronal mass. See, that's what I was really saying. There's a I kept making a video say, are we on the... You'll find, if you go looking through the archives, you'll see it. Are we on the verge of a coronal mass ejection? And it was really the corona. What I was talking about was that foresight of a coronal mass injection. It's an amazing thing, life, really. It is absolutely amazing. Little things like that will happen in your life that makes you realize you're not ordinary. And you're not as mundane as you like to think you are. Although the whole magical field is full of people who think they're like, you know, they're so narcissistic and full of themselves, and they don't produce anything except tell you about their book. Jesus, it's really blown up now. Telling about their book collections. That's really all they talk about. It's funny, I made the first part of this video about black magic, and then I stopped to have a cup of coffee, and I read something in a book, a little rest, and then I come back to make this video, and then the wind kicks up again. And it wasn't kicking up mental like this when I was having my break. So a bit of aeromancy there going on. Now I'm just down from the ocean here. That's a hell of a storm coming in. It's also something wonderful about it too, and enjoyable. Whoa! The car actually lifted off its suspension then. There's something about the storm, sitting in here watching it happen and feeling it. There's a tremendous energy. See, this charge is being used to charge this broadcast. This is the thing, you know, like the whole stereotype of the wizard in the tower whipping up the storm. Oh, here we go. You know, they'd whip up the storm, and then the storm would be used. This is how they check the magical power. And this storm is being whipped up right now. MacLear is dumping his energetic force onto the west coast of Ireland. The gods always make us aware of their presence. Always make us aware that they are here. The Cailleach Bear, the weather hag of the west coast of Ireland. They're all here right now with me. You're listening to them. It's funny, this has all started. This morning I made a video saying we need to go to magical war with Ireland. We need to destroy this country's economy. It's the only way we will raise Era and the old gods from their dormancy and bring them into the presence, and to get Irish people to wake up out of their comfortable miasma, because there's nothing like poverty and hardship to make a person see reality. And all those types that are screaming, far right now, they're only able to do it because they're comfortable and well off. I do hope that this is the old gods coming to our aid in the form of this storm right now. Because this storm wasn't like this morning when I did that video. And then when I started recording this VoN, it kicks up like now. Can you hear that? Like, I can't get out of the car. I just couldn't get out of the car right now. I have to wait till it calms down. I'm kind of stuck in here. I guess this is one of the things that makes VoN so special. It makes VoN, so many people have a great fondness for the broadcast and a great affinity for hearing my voice on it, that there's anything can happen. It feels a bit like, you know, Remember I did the one on war magic, and I played the American correspondent describing the bombs coming down on London. Remember that one, war magic? I can see incendiaries going off in the distance. I can see the St. Paul's Dome illuminated by the fires behind it. It feels a bit like that right now, doesn't it? Like a magical force has been unleashed upon Ireland. I called for it this morning. I petitioned the old gods to pay attention to us, please, if they could. And here's MacManaman MacLear dumping the Atlantic upon this country. The weather hag, the Calic Bear, waking up. And I was on the Beara Peninsula not too long ago. This could well be it. This could well be it. Well, I don't think there's much more for me to say tonight. It's a short VoN. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the atmosphere of the storm. And before I play the closing music, I'll just sit here for a little bit and say good night, good evening, or good day wherever you are, and be safe, because there's always greater forces at work than what the profane mortals of politics and state can foist upon us. This is me, your host, Thomas Sheridan, on the Velocity of Now, and we'll just spend a minute or so here listening to the Calic Beara and MacManaman MacLear.